talking juggling life is tricky. It's a balancing act many of us struggle with, but how can you burn bright without burning out? Whether it's a much needed break or looking deep within yourself. HR specialist and friend of the show, Jess Stuart, is here with her advice. Kia ora, good morning. I think advice point number one is, if you can, take the 3 days between the Easter break and Anzac Day. So we need not worry that Chris Chang has got the work-life balance here. Yeah, we're the ones who need to learn something. What is burnout?
So burnout is the extinction of motivation and incentive. It often comes with health implications as well, and it's a tricky one because often we don't know it's happening until it's too late, until it's happened.
Yeah, and it can be quite serious, right? Like, it can take a long time to recover from. What are the symptoms that you might be getting close to that if you're kind of being overwhelmed by stuff?
Yeah, it's often a slow burn, and so the symptoms can be easy to put down to other things. Like for me, I remember withdrawing from all of my social obligations and family and going, well, that's normal because I'm busy at work right now. There were healthy habits that went out of the door, very bad habits that started to creep in, and just an exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. And then, of course, often that's accompanied with health issues that aren't normal. And when all these things compound, in hindsight, looking back, it's quite obvious, but at the time it can be a slow burn, and often things that we relate to, hey, I'm just working hard right now, or pursuing a career.
Yeah, people often think that's a virtue as well, right? And I'm guilty of that, thinking like, oh, I'm so good because I'm working so hard. But actually, in the long run, it's not really in anyone's interests. But is burnout always a breaking point? Like, do people always get to a point where, something happens and all of a sudden they've kind of gone off the cliff, if you like?
That's often when we first notice, but there's often a slower burn until we get to that point. And I think you're right. There's this myth that more is always better, and the harder we work, the more we'll achieve. And yet in reality, what happens if we're busy all the time and exhausted and on the verge of burnout, we're not effective, we're not at our best, and yet that's the recipe that we've all been sold will help us perform well.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if that's the best way to approach this, to say, actually, if you do want to be productive, you do want to achieve a lot, the best way to do it is actually to structure in some balance, because if you don't have the balance, you won't be nearly as effective as you think you're going to be. So what are your top tips for trying to maintain a good work-life balance and avoid getting onto that downhill slope?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's the difference between quality and quantity. We're often focused on a quantity model. How many hours can I work, rather than quality? How can I add value and impact, and what are the most sensible things for me to do now that are going to add the most impact? And I think, you mentioned breaks before. Having boundaries and being able to say no is such a great skill to burnout proof ourselves. And sometimes it's a concept I call slowing down to speed up. Sometimes when we take our breaks and we have those pauses, we get more effective. We can focus better. Things don't take as long. We make less mistakes. So that helps us perform better. And we tend to think that if we take breaks, we're taking time away from work, rather than the taking of the breaks actually helping us do the work and do it better.
So what do those breaks look like? Do you mean a holiday, or can it be something simpler than that?
I mean, that would be nice, right?
That would be lovely, yeah. Chris Chang again, looking at you. Yeah.
Not always possible. So I always say it's about making the most of our moments. So it's purposeful pauses often, and small things can make a really big impact. So even things like having a lunch break, and most of us think when we're busy we need to work through our breaks, but even just having those small breaks can make such an impact to our cognitive function, as well as this sense of overload and overwhelm.
You talked about getting into bad habits. How important is exercise?
Pretty important. It's one of them that features. I think sometimes with this stuff, it's so simple, we think it's too simple. But if we got good sleep, and if we exercised, and if we ate the right things that kind of gave us energy, because a lot of this, when we talk about how do we track burnout, a lot of this is about managing our energy, and that stuff certainly does that. So it's almost like we talk about doing an energy audit, like the mobile phone batteries, they gave us a very specific percentage. And if we had that within us, we would know exactly what was left in our battery. But most of us don't know until the battery is empty, because we get sick, that battery was depleted. And I think that's a way of being able to track this.
See, it's so clear. It makes so much sense when you talk about it. But what if you are an employee who feels like you're being pushed too far and that actually you're not in a good space? How should you go about having a conversation with your employer and trying to create some better boundaries and perhaps give you a bit of space and avoid burnout?
Yeah, this is a really good one. And it's a really big question, because there's still quite a lot of stigma attached. And we don't want to go to our employer and say, hey, I'm worried about burning out, because we think they'll think we can't cope.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this is about how we have this conversation. So I'll often say to people I'm advising, if it's a conversation about performance rather than wellness, sometimes it carries more weight. And it shouldn't, because it fits both.
Yeah.
And yet, if we can talk to our employers about, hey, how do you get the best out of me? How do I keep performing well and remain sustainable so I can do my best work day in, day out? That's the kind of conversation we want to have. And that includes taking breaks and doing this slowing down to speed up.
Because you can understand from an employer's perspective how a lot of the time employers naturally are kind of focused on inputs rather than outputs when it comes to their employees. So there is a part of this, and it might require a bit of a cultural mind shift for some employers in looking at their employees and saying, actually, the best way for my business to be productive or for my organisation to be productive is to make sure that I structure these breaks, and that'll actually give my employees, the kind of mindset that'll make them produce the most or do the best job.
And keep them hanging around, right? Because it's really expensive for employers to replace people. And so if we can make sure our people are sustainable and they're doing their best work day in, day out, then that's going to help us with the bottom line and all the things the employer is focused on. And it's going to make sure that the employees are happier and healthier as well.
Fantastic. Lovely work, Jess. Thank you so much. Jess Stuart. You can find Jess's full